Greetings! Welcome to Day of the Indie. In this introduction to Moho tutorial series, you'll learn everything you need to know in order to make your way around Moho, starting with the interface and the draw tools. And what better way to learn than by creating an alien bug hybrid character named Fred? As you work through this series, you'll be building your skills and hopefully having some fun. By the end of the first part of the series, which will consist of several videos, you'll have a character that's ready to be rigged and animated. For those of you who don't know, or who haven't guessed by now, Moho is an animation program published by Smith Micro Software. At the time of this recording, Smith Micro offers two versions, Moho Debut 12 and Moho Pro 12. Although I'll be using the Pro version in this series, you should have no problem following along with the Debut version. Although, if you can manage it, I highly recommend the Pro version. Also, there are no prerequisites for this series. This is a beginner series, and as such, we'll start at the very beginning. And for us, that's with the sketch of our alien bug dude named Fred. I did this sketch in Clip Studio, another Smith Micro Software app. The sketch was hand-drawn using an iPad Pro, an Apple Pencil, and a cool little program by the name of AstroPad. These things together are great if you're looking for a Wacom alternative. So in order to get this sketch into Moho, we need to first launch Moho and then import it. You'll notice that when Moho first launches, it opens a demo project. You can actually change that behavior. In the Moho Preferences General tab, change the startup file from default startup file to whatever works for you. For me, no document works perfectly. You're also able to change some other global options. For example, if you prefer a lighter interface or even a different color for the highlights, you can change that in the Appearance tab. I actually like the defaults, so let me set them back real quick. While we don't have time to go over all of these options, I encourage you to look through each one. Just keep in mind, sometimes the interface gets a little wonky and you have to go back and reselect some of the options, such as the case here. Because of this, you should only modify one tab at a time. When you're happy with the settings in that tab, hit the OK button and then reopen the preferences if you want to adjust something else. Hopefully Smith Micro will fix this soon. All right, let's get that new file ready. If the default file is still open, go ahead and close it. Then create a new file by selecting File New from the main menu. Mac users, you can use the keyboard shortcut Command N on the keyboard. Now we have a new untitled file. Let's import the sketch. In Moho, there are a number of different ways to import images. You can basically import the image on its own layer using the File Import Image option. This creates a new layer using the file name as the layer name. If we draw over this image, we won't be able to see what we're drawing unless we change the order of the layers or muck around with the opacity settings. As you might have guessed, this can be a bit of a drag. That's why if you plan to trace an image, like we'll be doing here, you should import it as a traceable image. Let's go ahead and delete this layer and then re-import the sketch of Fred. To delete a layer, select the layer from the Layers panel and then click on the garbage can icon to delete it. This completely removes the layer. Since we're basically starting over, we might as well delete the shape too. To select the shape, switch to the Select Points tool and then click on the shape. Once selected, hit the Delete key. You're now back to a clean starting board, and you're ready to import the sketch as a traceable image. To do that, go back up to the File Import menu, and this time select Tracing Image from the list of options. Select the sketch of Fred, and then click Open. You now have a traceable image. Because the image was imported this way, you'll always be able to see it through the layers, regardless of their order or opacity settings. In fact, you'll notice that it doesn't even create a separate layer for the image. That's because basically at this point it's part of the stage. And in fact, you may have noticed that it even scaled things a little differently on this import. All right, so now we have this traceable image, but what if we just wanted to show the layers and hide the image? To do that, we can go up to the View menu and toggle the Show Tracing Image option, and you can turn that on and off. You can also use the keyboard shortcut Command U. All right, before we jump into the tools that you'll be using to draw Fred, let's remove that shape. Perfect. So, the first thing to understand is that Moho's panels change depending on which tool you have selected. Notice how the top bar options change depending on the tool that's selected. So, we want to start by drawing a shape. So, we'll select the Draw Shape tool. When this tool is selected, there are several new options up here. For example, you can set the shape, the rectangle, oval, triangle, star, arrow, so on and so forth. We'll select the oval shape because what we want to draw first is Fred's antenna. With the oval shape selected, press and hold the left mouse button and then drag an oval shape over the top part of Fred's left antenna. Alternatively, you can hold down the Shift key while dragging to keep things constrained, or you can hold the Alt key down to draw the oval out from the center. All right, let me get rid of these, and we're going to zoom in a bit. Incidentally, I'm using the hotkey Command plus to zoom in, but you can use the zoom in option from the View menu too. To zoom out, use Command minus, or again, the option from the View menu. With Moho, here's a pro tip. Learn the hotkeys. I come from an Adobe and Harmony background. Those are two other animation tools. And for me, the Moho interface was a little strange at first. I personally generally don't use hotkeys, but with Moho, I use them all the time. All right, so the shape doesn't need to be perfect. And in fact, this one looks just fine. But what are those red points? Well, those are vector points, and you can manipulate the points to adjust the shape of your shape. Now, you can't just grab the points and start dragging because weird things start to happen, like creating a new shape. I'm going to undo that with the Command Z hotkey. So, how do you go about grabbing those points and manipulating them? Well, if you just wanted to select them, obviously you can use the Select Points tool. But like I said, that doesn't allow you to manipulate, translate, or transform them. In order to do that, you need to use the Transform Points tool, which is right next to the Select tool. To select the individual points on a shape, you just click them. If you want to transform them, you can just left-click and drag them around to the position you want. But what if you wanted to select multiple points? Well, for that, you'd have to go back to the Select Points tool, and then you can left-click and drag around the points you want to select. But what if you wanted to select points that are not selectable using a nice rectangular shape like this one? Simple. You can switch on the lasso mode and then use that for your selection. You can also hold down the Shift key to add to your selection, and you can even click in the center of a shape to select the entire shape, or you can click on the curve or the line to select just that individual curve. This comes in handy when you have complex shapes that consist of multiple lines and curves. All right, now that you know how to select the shape's points, let's see what else can be done. If you switch back to the Transform Points tool and limit the selection to just a single point, you can toggle the Show Bezier Handles option on and off. Using these handles, you have a bit more control over how to shape the shape. You can also show or hide the curves with this option down here, as well as set how you want to view objects on the stage. So now you've got this oval, but what if it's not shaping up the way you want it? A lot of times you can simply add another point or two. By adding additional points, you introduce a little more flexibility when molding the shape. To add a new point, use the Add Point tool. Then select the spot where you want to add the point and left-click. Boom, you now have a new point, which either might help you shape the shape or might make it even harder. But before you go back to shaping it, don't forget to switch back to the Transform Points tool. I'm also going to hide the Bezier handle. Sometimes it's easier to shape things when those are hidden. By the way, you can always see what the hotkey is for any item. It's usually just off to the right. Here you can see the hotkey for the Transform tool is T, and for the Add Point tool, it's the letter A. And remember, if you wanted to hide the tracing image, Command U hides it, Command U reshows it. So we've got our oval shape, but what if we wanted to adjust the curves, where the points meet, if we wanted to maybe smooth them out or create more of a peak or an angle? For that, you would use the Curvature tool. With the Curvature tool selected, you can either set the curvature to be a peak or a smooth curve. You can even manually set the degree of the curvature. You can also use the Alt key and drag the mouse left and right to make smaller adjustments. All right, let's back up a little bit. For the antenna, I don't think I need all these points. To delete a point, select it using the selection tool and then hit the delete key on your keyboard. Fantastic. Now let's reshape this to match more closely to the sketch underneath. Again, make sure you're on the transform points tool before you try manipulating things. And again, this is where the interface of Moho might get a little frustrating at first because you're switching back and forth between all these tools. And in something like Adobe Animate, you don't have to really do that. But in Moho, you do. And I'll tell you, I was a little frustrated when I first started doing it, but after a while, it becomes second nature. All right, now let's go ahead and draw the other top of the antenna. Again, select the Create Shape tool and then draw another oval. Now select the Transform Points tool and shape the shape. Excellent, these look great. Let's get the bottom part of the antenna in now. So for the bottom part of the antenna, you're going to use the Freehand tool, and the hotkey for that is F. Of course, you can just select it from the draw panel like I did here. With the Freehand tool, you can set some pretty cool options, like whether or not to taper the ends, and if you do taper them, by how much. You can also set smoothing options and pressure sensitivity, for example, if you're using a pressure-sensitive pen and tablet. But for this exercise, I'm going to switch all of that off. Then I'm going to draw the bottom part for the left antenna, taking care not to connect the ends of the line to the top part of the antenna. To draw the line, I'm going to press the left mouse button and drag it the way that I want it, and then let go to end the line. Now let's go ahead and take that line and connect it to the top part of the antenna. Right now, they're two separate shapes. Switch to the Transform Points tool and then select the top point of the bottom portion of the antenna. Switch on the Auto Weld option, which is up here, and then drag the point to the curve of the top part of the antenna. You'll see a red circle if the connection can be made. Once you see that, let go, and you should hear a click when you release the mouse button. This indicates a successful connection, and now you have a single shape for the antenna. All right, let's draw the other one, but this time start the line already touching the curve of the top part of the antenna. You'll see that familiar red circle when you know you're on the right spot. Notice how the selection looks like a checkered pattern. You can actually switch this off by using the option in the Style panel. So now you have these two individual shapes. Using the Transform Points tool, you can select the shape and resize it, rotate it, move it, and you can still select individual points or curves within that shape and manipulate them separately. All right, so I'm going to clean up these lines a little bit. You go ahead and practice what you learned in this video, and feel free to trace other parts of the sketch using different shapes. Add points and manipulate them. But don't get too wrapped up in what you're doing, because in the next video, you're going to learn about layers. Layers play a hugely important role in creating your characters and their animations. And with Moho, you're in for a few surprises. All right, folks, stay tuned. And remember, if you're not having fun, you're probably not doing it right. Greetings! Welcome to Day of the Indie, and welcome to part 2 of the Introduction to Moho tutorial series. In this part of the series, you'll learn about layers and layer management. If you missed part 1, which covered the interface and drawing tools, head over to dayoftheindie.com and go ahead and give it a watch. While you're there, grab a copy of the resources. Speaking of resources, open the file fred-part-01. Alternatively, if you have your own file that you've been working on from part 1, feel free to open that. If you open the file and notice the tracing image is missing, don't panic. You can simply re-import it like so. Fantastic. With the tracing image back in place, it's time to start thinking about layers and layer management. When docked, the Layers panel is located off to the bottom right. However, for this demo, I'm going to undock the Layers panel to make it easier to see things. Okay, here's the undocked panel. Now, most of what I'm going to show you can be done in both the debut version and the pro version. There are a few exceptions which I'll point out along the way. Before getting too far into drawing Fred, it's a good idea to plan things out. That doesn't mean you need to know everything, but you should have some idea of the layer structure. Right now, Fred's antenna exists on a single layer named Layer 1. Sure, you could add more Fred parts to this same layer, but eventually things would get all jumbled up, making it ridiculously difficult to get around the file. Not to mention, animating Fred would be rough. Using layers, you can avoid the rough and ridiculous part. You can also use layers to create some wicked cool effects, which I'll show you later in the series. Okay, so what can be done on the Layers panel? Well, for starters, you can add a new layer. And you can see here there are quite a few different layer types. You can duplicate an existing layer. You can create a reference layer, which is a pro-only feature. You can delete layers. You can access layer settings. And you can create layer comps, also a pro-only feature. Additionally, you can control the layer visibility and whether or not a layer will show up on the timeline. This is also a pro-only feature. With this little arrow, you can access the Quick Settings window. You can also change the color of the layer like this. And of course, you can rearrange and resize things. Furthermore, you can modify which columns you want to see by right-clicking and selecting or deselecting the items in the list. By the way, comments and tags are a pro-only feature. Another pro-only feature is the filter and search bar. You can use the filter and search bar to search for layers, or you can turn off filters altogether. Not a fan of filters? No worries. You can switch on column sorting and then sort the columns any way you'd like. The best part of that is the sorting will not affect the actual layer order. Some other things you can do include double-clicking the layer to bring up the layer settings, single-clicking the name to change the layer name, and right-clicking the layer to access the context menu. That's the Layers panel in a nutshell. Now it's time to add a few layers and get Fred organized. The first thing to do is split the antenna into two separate layers. The easiest way is to duplicate the existing layer. Then rename the layers to L-antenna and R-antenna. If you're wondering, or rather worrying, which is left and which is right, don't. Choosing left and right is a bit arbitrary, and I've seen it done both ways. Some people use screen side when designating left versus right, and some people use real life side for their left and right. Obviously, these are in direct contrast to one another. No matter which way you go, the key is to pick one and stick with it. For this demo, I'll be using screen side to avoid some confusion. But when I do turnaround work, I tend to use real life side so I can keep track of which side the body parts belong to. With the layers named, it's time to remove the left antenna from the right antenna layer and the right antenna from the left antenna layer. With the R-antenna layer selected and the Transform Points tool selected, click on the left side antenna, which will select the shape. I'm going to zoom in to make it a little easier to see. I'm also going to move the Layers panel out of the way and resize it. All right, that's a little bit better. Now select the shape. Then hit Delete key to delete it from the canvas. Now select the left antenna layer, and this time click on the right side antenna, selecting the entire shape, and then delete it with the Delete key. Fantastic. To make sure things were done as expected, toggle the visibility on and off like so. If it all looks cool, you're ready to move on. But before you do, here's a pro tip. If you're coming from an Adobe background like me, you might be thrown off with the way layers and shapes are selected. In Moho, you can only select shapes from the current layer. If you try to select shapes from other layers, it won't work. Okay, that's not entirely true. It will work if you know how to do it. To select a shape from a different layer, hold the Option key down and then right-click the shape. Keep an eye on the Layers panel and you can see how it automatically selects the layer where the shape lives. Anyway, I just wanted to point that out because it was something that frustrated me in the beginning. But now it's time to get back to Fred. The next part is to draw Fred's head. Fred's head will go onto its own layer named Face. To create a new layer, click the New Layer button. As you saw earlier, you're presented with a rather lengthy list of options. In this case, Fred's face will be a vector layer, so go ahead and choose that. Then for the layer name, type Face. Now select the Draw Shape tool and verify the shape is set to oval. Set the fill to be a nice shade of green, set the stroke to be black, and the width to be 4. Then draw the shape. You may notice there's a slight issue. The antenna shows up over the face. You can see this if you hide the tracing image, and remember that option's up here. While you could correct that by drawing things a bit differently, and in some cases you'll do just that, in this case, however, you'll want to adjust the layer order. To do that, grab the layer and drag it to where you want. In this case, the face should be the topmost layer, so go ahead and drag it up to the top. With layer ordering, it goes exactly how you might expect. Layers below other layers can be obstructed, and layers above other layers will be seen. Now that you have Fred's face and antenna in place, and in the proper order, it's time to place them into a group. Groups are a Pro-only feature. That being said, Pro users click the New Layer button, and this time select Group from the list and name the layer Head. Now select the other 3 layers, the face, the L-antenna, and the R-antenna. To do that, click the first layer, then hold the Shift key and select the last layer. This will select everything in between. In this case, there's only 3 layers and only one in between. If you wanted to skip layers, suppose you only wanted the top and the bottom one, you can hold the Command key down and individually add to your selection. With all 3 layers selected, drag them into the new head group layer. Fantastic! The group layer now contains some of Fred's head parts. Using this arrow right here, you can show or hide those parts. Keep in mind though, this is just collapsing and expanding the group contents. It has no impact on layer visibility. If, however, you were to toggle that setting for the group, it will affect the layers inside the group. Of course, you can also control visibility on an individual layer basis. As long as the parent group is visible, it will work. So there you have it, the basics of layers and layer management, which brings us to the end of part 2. In part 3, you'll dive deeper into layers and into Moho. In the meantime, play with what you learned so far, add more layers, mess around with the drawing tools, and see if you can get the rest of Fred worked out on your own. If not, don't worry, because in the next video, you'll see exactly how this is done. Until next time. If you enjoyed watching this video, please leave a comment, let us know on Twitter, and be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel and our newsletter. And remember, if you're not having fun, you're probably not doing it right. Thanks for watching. Greetings, welcome to Day of the Indie, and welcome to part 3 of the Introduction to Moho video tutorial series. If you haven't seen part 1 or 2, I recommend starting there first. If you did, cool, you're ready for the 3rd and final video. In this part, Fred gets finished, and in the process, you'll learn about layer masks, shape effects, and how to give your work a little more style. So with that in mind, go ahead and open the starter file, which you can grab from dayoftheindie.com. You'll notice that Fred is, for the most part, complete. but he does have a few areas that need a little love. For example, his left eye, his mouth, his left antenna, his left arm, and his cape. On the plus side, both of his legs are pretty much done. That said, let's start by adding some highlights and shadows, or more accurately, shading. In Moho, as with so many other apps, there are multiple ways to accomplish the same thing. What I mean by that is this. The way I do things in Moho, like lights and shadows for instance, is just one way to do things. If you've watched other videos that show how to do things a little different, don't worry about it. Try everything and then decide what works best for you. All right, let's take a look at Fred's antenna. I already worked on the right one. So if I zoom in, you can see that I changed the color to green. I added a highlight color and I added a shadow. I also adjusted the line width here and there to give it a bit more style. Let's jump over to the left antenna and do the same thing. Start by selecting the L-antenna layer, which is part of the head group. Now select the shape using the Select Shape tool. With the shape selected, go ahead and change the fill color. I'm going to use the eyedropper to pull the green color from the other antenna. With that done, it's time to add the highlight. For that, I'm going to draw an oval shape on top of the shape that's already there. For this new shape, it shouldn't have a stroke or be green, so let's change that. Click off the current shape and choose the Draw Shape tool. Make sure the autofill is the only option selected. Then set the fill color to white. Also set the alpha to 25. When the color is white and the alpha is set to 25, it tends to give the illusion of a highlight. All right, with the option set, go ahead and draw the shape. If you need to adjust things, use the Transform Points tool to manipulate the shape until it looks good. Of course, if you need to add more points, use the Add Points tool. Cool, now let's get the shading in there. The way I always add shading, I shouldn't say always. The way I typically add shading is by using the Shaded Effect style. If you look at the Style panel, you'll see there's an Effect option with a drop-down menu. Some of these you'll see right away, and some you won't see until you render the drawing. Luckily for us, the Shaded Effect is one you can see right away. Go back to the Select Shape tool and select the original shape. Now head over to the Effect Style and select the Shaded Effect from the drop-down menu. At that point, you'll be presented with a pop-up menu where you can set all the different options. I'm going to set the offset to 8 and the blur to 0. I'm also going to turn on the threshold option. The threshold option works in conjunction with the blur, and it can be used to produce smoother transitions in the corner. I'm also going to adjust the light angle, setting it to 135. And finally, I'm going to set the shadow color. I'll leave it black, but I'll adjust the alpha to 25, which gives things a nice look. Perfect. Now that the shadow's in there, I think I want to adjust the highlight a bit. Okay, that's better. Now it's time to adjust the lines. For that, I'm going to switch to the Line Width tool, grab some points, and then move the mouse left and right to set the width. Nice. Okay, let's move on to the masking. Masking in Moho is what you can use to control the visible region of a layer. Take a look at Fred's right eye. Let me zoom out a bit. If I grab his pupil and drag it outside of the eyeball, notice how the area of the pupil that's on the outside is not visible. That's masking. Let me show you how it's done. But first, let me put his pupil back where it belongs. Otherwise, I kind of feel like he's staring at every keystroke I'm making, and that's just creepy. All right, that's better. Time to fix that other eye. Select the left eye layer group, which is L-I. Inside this group, there are 3 layers: pupil, eye, and dark dash circle. To set up a mask, double-click the layer group, the one named L-I, which will bring up the Layer Settings panel. From there, select the Masking tab and choose the Hide All option, then click OK. This is going to use the bottom layer as the mask, in this case the dark dash circle layer. But we don't want that, and here's why. Although it might be difficult to see, notice how the pupil goes outside of the eyeball and travels into the dark circle. Also, the eyeball, that's the white part, is being clipped over here by the dark circle. So to fix things, we need to adjust the mask. Double-click the dark dash circle layer to bring up its layer settings. Then select the Don't Mask This Layer option from the Masking tab and click OK. This will remove the layer from the mask. Now, double-click the eye layer to bring up its settings, and for its masking option, choose Add to Mask. Incidentally, the icons on the layer will indicate how the layer is reacting to the mask. Okay, let's check out that eye now. It looks like the eyeball isn't clipped anymore, and the pupil doesn't travel into the dark circle, which is really cool. Except for the dark circle is a little too dark. Fred, being the evolved alien bug dude that he is, gets way more sleep than me, so let's lighten up that circle a bit. The easiest thing to do is adjust the layer's opacity setting. Double-click the layer and change the opacity to 25. All right, one last thing. The eye needs some shading. Go to the eye layer and select the shape and set the effect style to shaded. When prompted for the options, set the light angle to 110, the offset to 10, and the blur to 0. Click on the threshold option and then set the color to black with an alpha setting of 25. Fantastic. Now, before we move on to the mouth, let's take care of Fred's arms. Fred's right arm is missing the edge. This was done using the Hide Edge tool. So for the left arm, let's do the same. Using the Select Shape tool, select the upper layer from the L-arm layer. Then, using the Hide Edge tool, click on the edge to hide it. Now, use the Line Width tool to give it some character. I'm going to zoom in a bit and tweak his arm, because it kind of looks weird. All right, on to Fred's cape, the thing that makes him super. Fred's cape is made up of 2 layers, one for the lines on the fabric and one for the fabric. I'd probably combine these 2 layers if I were animating Fred, but for the sake of this tutorial, I decided to split them out. Anyway, Fred needs one more line on his cape. Switch to the Add Point tool and jump over to the Lines layer in the Cape group. Let me zoom out. Okay, to draw a line, click and drag. Now turn that line into a shape by switching to the Create Shape tool. Then select the line, make sure Stroke is selected, and then click the Create Shape button. Once the shape is created, go ahead and mess around with the line width until you're happy. If you need to zoom in, that's fine. All right, so all that's left to do is Fred's mouth. Go to the Mouth group and set the masking option to Hide All. Of course, when you do that, the outlines for the mouth get kind of wonky. In order to fix that, select the Mouth Vector layer, that's the one at the bottom here, and bring up its layer settings. For the masking settings, switch on the option to Exclude Strokes. And there you go. The outlines for the mouth are back. At this point, you can mess around with the teeth and not worry about them busting through Fred's mouth, which will come in handy when you start to animate things. So that's it. There you have it. Fred is pretty much done, which means the Introduction to Moho video tutorial series is also done. But don't worry, we'll be working on more Moho tutorials over at dayoftheindie.com, so be sure to stop by. And that's it for me. Thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoyed this video. I'm just going to mess around with Fred a bit more, kind of fix things a little bit. I'll save this file. It'll be included with the resources. In the meantime, feel free to play around with what you've done. And remember, if you're not having fun, you're probably not doing it right. See you next time. If you enjoyed watching this video, leave a comment, let us know on Twitter, and be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Thanks for watching.
Yeah. Yeah.
Greetings! Welcome to Day of the Indie. In this video tutorial, you'll learn how to install and create custom brushes in Clip Studio. To help get you started, go grab yourself the free pack of brushes over at dayoftheindie.com. Go ahead, I'll wait. Alright, so you downloaded the free brushes and you even grabbed yourself the 16 zombie killing brushes just for fun. Perfect. So how do you get these installed? Well, first you need to launch Clip Studio. Then you need to make a spot for the new custom brushes. Sure, you could just add them into any of the tool groups, but it's best to keep your brushes organized. By the way, the term brushes is a bit misleading. In Clip Studio, there are tools and subtools which are broken down into different categories like pens, brushes, erasers, etc. For example, the pen tool has a collection of subtools like the G pen, the mapping pen, and so on and so forth. However, most folks are more familiar with the term brushes, and while it may not be technically accurate to use these terms interchangeably, I don't think the universe is going to rip itself apart if we do. However, if that does happen, I take full responsibility and I totally apologize. Okay, back to setting up the spot for these brushes. To do that, the easiest way is to copy an existing subtool. Go ahead and select the mapping pen. Now click the Create Copy of Currently Selected Subtool button located here at the bottom of the panel. Change the name to Dottie and then click OK. Now using this copy, you can create a new group by dragging it up to the top of the tool palette, like so. You now have a new tool group ready and waiting for some new brushes. So there are two ways to import brushes. You can import them one at a time, which can take forever if you have a lot of brushes, or you can import an entire group, which is the way to go. So how do you do that? Simple. You start by moving the canvas out of the way. Then you select the group of brushes from your file system. Once you have the brushes selected, you drag them back into Clip Studio, dropping them on the newly created group. Huzzah! Your new brushes are installed and you can start using them right away. But what if you wanted to create your own brushes? Well, it all starts with an image. Go ahead and create a new file. You don't have to give it a file name, but I'm going to call this one Custom Brushes. You can do the same if you want to. Now here's the important part. You need to set the width to 2000 pixels, the height to 2000 pixels, and the resolution to 300 dpi. This will give you a nice size to work with. More important than that, however, is setting the basic expression color to gray. If you fail to do that, your brush will not work as expected. For example, when you go to use it, you won't be able to select a color. The final setting here is the paper color. Now you can leave it white if you want, but I like to change my background to what I call green screen green color. This allows me to see things better as I draw them and color them. Again, this is a matter of personal preference, but maybe you should give it a try and see if you like it. Okay, with these settings in place, you can click the OK button to create your new file. That is a mighty shade of green, isn't it? All right, so look, there are a lot of ways and techniques to create custom brushes, and to be quite honest with you, it is a very personal and creative process. So for this demo, I'm just going to throw some lines onto the canvas. I'm also going to add in some variations with shading. This will allow the brush to do some wicked cool things later on. Now you don't have to do any of this, you can just draw one or two lines to get going, but I encourage you to come back here and try some different things later on. This here is just an example. Okay, this looks good. It's time to take this image and turn it into something that's usable for brushes, and that something in Clip Studio is called image material. To register this image as new material, make sure you're on layer 1. I'm actually going to rename this layer to Custom Brush because I like to keep things organized. With the layer selected, go to Edit, Register Material, and then select Image. When the Material Property window pops up, you'll see a nice preview of what the image material will look like. If it looks good, which I bet it does, the first thing you want to do, because it's so easy to forget, is to check the Use for Brush Tip Shape box down here in the bottom left. The next thing is to select a location in which to save the material. I made a new folder for mine, but that's because I really love to be organized. If you don't have a separate folder, you can choose the image material location. I'm also going to set a search tag so it's easier to locate later. Again, this is optional, but, well, you know, organization and all. When you have everything set, click OK. And there you go. Your material is now in the library, ready and waiting. So what next? How do you take this material object and turn it into a brush? Remember the tool you copied earlier? Well, you're going to use that. With that tool selected, right-click and choose Settings of Subtool from the list. Now rename it from Dotty to Dotty:"Custom Brush. Then click OK. Now head over to the Tool Property tab and click the little wrench at the bottom right. This brings up the properties for the subtool or the brush. Inside this window is where you can set all of the options for your brush, including the tip that you want to use. Go ahead and select Brush Tip from the left-hand side. Then click on the Material tab over here on the right. In order to select the material you just created, click on the Add Brush Tip Shape button over here. Then search for your brush. Now you know why those search tags are handy. And when you find it, select it. Now go in and mess around with some of the other settings until you get the brush looking the way you want. And you'll see a little preview up here in the top. You can adjust things like the thickness or the size or even the opacity. Notice here the little eye icon. When this is showing, that option is available on the Subtool property window of the brush. So if you wanted to have quick access to that option, let's say on the thickness setting, for example, you can just set it like this and boom, there you go. It shows up on the panel. Okay, let's go with these settings and switch over to the test canvas. I want to see how this brush looks. That looks pretty sweet. Oh, and remember the shades of gray? Well, now I can set 2 different colors on my brush. And voila, instant coolness. All right, so the last thing to do here is to get this brush out and into the wild. Maybe you want to share it with your friends or sell it on your site or whatever the case is. To do that, select the brush, right-click, and choose Export Subtool. Now select a location, give it a name, and click Save. You now have a brush that you can share with the world. Keep in mind, you only scratch the surface of custom brushes in Clip Studio. Go ahead and play around. Don't worry too much about how things turn out. Get comfortable with all the different settings and push yourself to try new things. You never know, you might end up with something really cool. Remember something, if you're not having fun, you're probably not doing it right. Until next time, folks, take care. If you enjoyed watching this video, leave a comment, let us know on Twitter, and be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Thanks for watching.